Today, I have a wonderfully fascinating guest with me, Sophie Matterson. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ben. Good to be here.
Where do I currently find you sitting? Where are you today?
I'm at home today, which can be unusual for me, but I'm in a little country town called Kilcoy, which is in Queensland, Australia. I am currently, my life path has taken me farming, so that's what I'm doing at the moment.
Love it.
I've replaced camels with cows for now.
So we've got we
Yeah.
got 1 hour to chat, really. We will talk and unwrap all about your journeys and your mindsets and your background and all that sort of stuff. But we always love our guests to sort of top the show with their own little bio, a paragraph just to explain who you are.
Yeah, well, I guess, I mean, I'm many things. I'm whatever the journey takes me on at the current time. But I guess I'm an adventurer. I guess I'm an author. I back in 2020 and 2021, I embarked on a big mission to trek across Australia with my 5 wild caught camels. So I guess that's been the big adventure of my life, which I'm sure many more to come, I hope. And then I subsequently wrote a book called The Crossing, which is all about my trip across the country.
Magic, I have one here. And I've started digging into it. So even though I have sat on the plane, I've started to unwrap it and started to discover the journey. I'd love now just really to sort of dig deeper, I suppose, into you and the background. I think you qualify most definitely for all of those things you put yourself out there for. You know, the term adventure is such a wide ranging name in a way. It could be, you know, we got our people we speak to on a regular basis, like Jeff Wilson, who takes people across, the Arctic, and he goes and does his own mad, crazy missions. Then we got people that for the first time ever have gone and done their own backyard adventure. And that qualification of adventure really is so spread across everything. So most definitely adventure. The thing that triggered in my head when you said that, the years of 2020 and 2021 to embark on something like this, the world embarked on its own crazy adventure then, under the restrictions of COVID. So I'm sure that played a massive part in your headspace and the journey and how much you could do. But first of all, I want to rewind. I just want to take Sophie right back to the start and, life growing up, where you were, your connection to the outdoors, all those sorts of things. It's always a nice sort of start point.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess, like you were saying, like I never counted myself as an adventurer, which is why I sort of hesitate when I talk, call myself that. I didn't, my parents weren't big campers. We didn't do much of that. And it really wasn't until sort of, I guess, my 20s that I started getting a bit more into outdoor things. And I started to get into doing some multi-day hikes. And that was kind of my first taste of being out there in the wilderness and doing some form of adventure. And I quickly just became so hooked. But really at that point in time, I had no idea that I was going to step forth and do something as big as what I decided to do with the camels. I was really just happy to do some walks in the outdoors. And that kind of led me to really thinking that I wanted to do a solo trip. And I was fascinated at the time. I was living in Adelaide, and I was fascinated with sort of the outback of Australia being on my doorstep and never having been there. And having grown up on the East Coast, all my friends, they went to the beach on their school holidays. No one ever went outback, and it was this sort of mysterious place that I just felt like I had never touched on. I'd always gone overseas. When I say I wasn't an adventurer, I grew up doing a lot of travel. My parents were always moving, and travel has always been a big part of my life. But I guess not so much adventuring in the sense of hiking or climbing or anything like that. But yeah, so I decided I really wanted to set out on this adventure of my own and kind of see what I was capable of. And I decided to hike 9 days up in the Flinders Ranges, which is in sort of far north, South Australia.
Yeah.
And it was just such an incredibly empowering experience. I hated it. The first couple of days, absolutely hated it. I thought, why the hell am I doing this? My pack is so heavy. Like, what is this even for? Who am I proving this to? All those questions you have. And And funnily enough, I met this guy on the trail, and it was almost like he was from the film Into the Wild, and he had a push bike, and he'd sort of given up everything in his life, and he was on his push bike, and he had gone. It was like a $200 bike, like it cost nothing, and he'd gone from Adelaide. From Melbourne to Adelaide, and then he was going up to Darwin, and then he was going to hitchhike with the push bike across out to Indonesia and keep going around the world. And I just thought,
Was it an Australian guy?
This guy is yeah, he was an Aussie guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we just had this night where we sat around the campfire just talking. And I just thought, man, if this guy can do this epic adventure, like surely I can get through these 9 days on the trail. And I did. And I came out the end just feeling so incredibly empowered by the whole experience. But not really having any idea that was going to lead me to the big adventure that I did down the track. But I guess it gave me the bug in a way. I started looking started setting my sights.
Come out of that even that sort of that paragraph. So many questions that come out of it. I always think it's amazing. There's always someone that you find when you think you're out there doing something a little bit wild, a little bit whack. There's always someone that's doing it a little bit more wild and a little bit more whack. There's always someone else out there, isn't there? I don't know. I think you probably
100%.
Once you get to the peak of the wackiness, you then enter the asylum, and that's a very big different tipping point.
Yes,
That sort of space.
It's
So,
probably a dangerous point. There's
a limitation, isn't there? I also love one of the statements in the book. You talked about never going to the Outback, and it is this big mystical term. Coming from the UK, we learn about the Australian Outback, and very much in the olden days, there's rock and now Uluru. But there's one statement you put, and you don't know where. No one sort of dictates where the Outback starts. It's just this big mass in the centre of Australia. I love that sort of analogy there. In your head when you're growing up, and I grew up in the south of England. I now live on the east coast of Australia, and it is that very much. How far do you go inland before the red signifies I'm in the official Outback?
Outback, yeah, that sense of going west, when you're on the east coast and going into that heartland. Yeah, it's something else. It's a different world.
The 9-day multi-day hike that you're on then, the significance of doing it by yourself, was it sort of escapism? Was it just because no one else would come and join you? Why did you decide, the early days, that it was going to be about you and the wilderness?
I think at that point in time, really, I was introduced into the sort of multi-day hikes through my ex-boyfriend, Sam, and he had been in the army, and he really taught me the fundamentals of everything to do with camping and, navigation and surviving in the wilderness and so on. And I felt like we'd always done things together, and I loved that, but I wanted to be able to know that I could go out there and survive on my own, that there was no guy there, setting up the tent or starting the fire for me. Guys love starting fires, so it's really hard to take that job off them. So, I just wanted to know that I could do that on my own, and that, that there was no one else that could, help me as a woman with those tasks, I guess.
And in those sort of early days, you sort of get dropped off, or you park the car or whatever, and you start, and everything sort of feels uncomfortable. And it's only sort of after the first few hours you start to get into the zone of okay, and start worrying about what I haven't got with me now, and worry about looking forward and looking at the journey ahead. And obviously you've done that sort of multiple times now, where there's so much involved in the prep. There's so much involved in those first few hours of the nervousness about doing things right. And then you get into your groove, and then you get with them. As you sort of develop the hike, and as long as it progressed and you got further through it, did you sort of find that you were becoming more and more comfortable? Was the whole journey just like, why the hell am I out here doing this?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Talking about that. Yeah. You're just paranoid, I think, about all the gear. And this has happened to me on every, subsequent adventure I've been on, I guess, like that paranoia about, the gear failing and have I got everything and so on. I remember on that particular hike, I had borrowed a sat phone. It was the first time I'd ever used a sat phone. I borrowed it from Sam, who had borrowed it from the army, basically. Probably not so legally, but anyway. And I remember calling him on the sat phone to make sure that it worked. And I couldn't get the phone signal I couldn't turn it on, or I couldn't get it to work or something. It's something about it absolutely panicked me. And then everyone's sort of saying, oh, have you bitten off more than you can chew? You know, maybe you shouldn't be doing the whole thing. And, you know, so that puts doubt in your mind. And yeah, and then you're right, there gets to that sort of that turning point in any trip, I think, where you suddenly start walking along going, geez, I'm actually really enjoying this. I'm actually really here right now. And I'm really, you know, I don't like, why did all of that stuff matter? Like, I got the sat phone working in the end. It's all good. You know, I've got everything, you know, I didn't need all of that stuff that I thought that I was going to need, you know, like a trowel or something like that. I used a stick. It's fine. Yeah. So there's definitely that turning point, which is such a lovely zone to be in.
When you got to the Flinders and you were doing your walk down there, then obviously that's your sort of first disconnection from everyone around you, and you're really entering a space of solitude and wilderness. Once you're on that journey, do you feel like you covered the ranges, you know your map, you know your profile? Did you sort of plan every day, or just there's a marked trail, you follow it and you get as far as you can? Or did you sort of set up your camps? You're that prepared with your itineraries?
Yeah, I was pretty prepared with that trip. I think because it was the first trip I'd ever done on my own, I was very paranoid. And Sam was such an organizational person, having been in the army, that, you know, he really drilled out, you know, we're going to do a navigational sheet, you know, you're going to do this number of Ks per day, and this is where you'll get to, and so on. So that trip was very, you know, organized in that way. And I guess that was a big difference with the camel trek, is that I really had to learn to leave a lot of that behind, because it doesn't work that way with animals. You can do that when you're just on your own, you know, obviously it's dependent on weather and a lot of, you know, variable factors in that sense, but animals are the ultimate variable. You know, you walk at their pace, really.
I love the sort of transition there, because we're going from, I suppose, just that you were controlled very much by the voices in your head, as we all are, you know, the person that sort of fills the little thing that fills you with doubt, the thing that fills you with the positivity to keep going. That journey was very much you on your own. And then obviously you start to evolve you as a person, and the journey means, and the transport you take. And slowly but surely, you know, we'll get to the book in a bit, and the real journey of taking animals and stuff. How did you sort of deal with the demons on that journey when you're out by yourself? You know, I'm not going to put a mask on it, but you're a female by yourself in a wild, remote part of the world. How did you deal with the sort of the noises at night, or the fear of a car in the distance, or things like that? How was your head processing that stuff?
Gosh, yeah, it's, I mean, I think for me, there's always actually been like a comfortability in the bush. Um, uh, and yeah, you know, a lot of people talk about that. You know, I stopped listening to, you know, for a while I listened to a lot of those true crime podcasts, and you know,
Waiting for a problem.
a majority that are set in South Australia, and I thought, you know what, I don't need to be listening to the Snowtown murders right now. That is not conducive to me going on an adventure here. So I stopped that. But actually being, I think like you said, it's being out in the wilderness on your own has never scared me as such. It's when you are on your own for a long time, and then there is an intrusion from the outside world. So there's a car that comes along, or there's someone that arrives, and you don't know who they are, and that can be a really unsettling feeling when you've spent a lot of time on your own, I think. But you know, every experience I've had again and again, you know, it always has turned out well in terms of the people that I've met along the way. You sort of think, oh God, who's this person turning up? You know, and another incredible encounter I had, which was very fortuitous on that journey, was that as I was, you know, I remember I stopped at this little hut, Mayo's hut, and there was a dust storm had picked up, and it was horrendous. And I remember sheltering in this little hut and looking outside and thinking, what is this godforsaken landscape that I've come to? You know, it was like, you know, tumbleweeds and dust everywhere and flies everywhere, and, you know, being from a greener environment, I thought, what the hell is this place? And then out of this dust storm walked in this string of camels, and it was a company that they were trekking with camels. And it was just like the most random chance encounter. And I'd never had anything to do with camels at this point in time. But I'd seen the movie called Tracks, about Robin Davidson, who trekked from Alice Springs to the coast. And so anyway, I met these people, this company, and they were taking tourists out on a trek. And again, you know, that was another encounter that when I was struggling, I guess, with those demons of, can I continue and what am I doing here? You know, I thought, oh, there's other people out here and they're doing this amazing, you know, they're doing this amazing experience, and they, you know, are good people, and they, you know, offered me dinner, and I sat around the campfire with them, and we, you know, talked all evening about, you know, their expedition and so on. And then, yeah, fast forward down the track, I ended up going back to the Flinders and working for that company, and that was part of my training with Camels, really.
That's sort of the next natural step then, really, in the questions is, yes, you're up there doing your independence and your multi-day hikes and you're by yourself, but then there's this big leap, this void that we've got to fill now of how do you, apart from the interaction there that you've got with the camels, how do you then sort of build up the headspace that these are animals that I want to deal with? How do you get the knowledge and the experience before you then embark on the big journey?
It was almost like, I guess it was like everything just kept shouting at me in my life that I needed to go down this random path of camels. At the time, I was working in film and TV, so I had, you know, I wasn't even doing I wasn't doing a farming job. I wasn't doing an animal related job, but I really wanted to be. I knew that I really wanted to be outside more. And after I'd met those camels down in South Australia, I moved back up to Brisbane, and I ended up hearing about some people that ran a camel dairy. Actually, it turned out it was a good friend from school. It was her auntie. And so I thought, oh, I really would like to take a bit of time off film and TV and sort of explore this, you know, alternative, you know, farming career. Anyway, I just thought it would be a summer job. I thought, oh, I'll take some time off film and TV and I'll go do this summer job. I'll go hang out with a bunch of camels and milk some camels for the summer.
Naturally.
And that just naturally, as one does. But I just thought it was so, I guess I've always been attracted to the sort of the oddness and the bizarre. And they were such a different sort of kooky animal that I loved it. And it led me down this real rabbit warren, I guess, of as well understanding that we have a huge history with camels in Australia. And that ties back into exploration. You know, there was many, you know, Burke and Wills took camels on their expedition. And there's many crossings of the Outback done, you know, via camel. And there's a romance, I think, to camel journeys.
Yeah, it's probably one of the most beautiful really silhouetted imageries you can ever imagine.
Isn't it?
The brain of the camels, and having done a bit of Africa, knowing that how important they were with the salt industry. You know, they are there, and they were there as the early days of the caravans.
Yeah, so exactly. It was this linking in my brain of kind of like, I love animals. These animals are fascinating. We have a history with these animals. And gosh, there's this huge wild population out there in the center of Australia that are just like crying out to be caught and tamed and, you know, become, you know, a beast of burden, I guess, in a way. And to be able to facilitate, you know, I knew that they were capable. Once I started working more with camels and doing the trekking side of things, I started to realize just how amazing they are at being able to facilitate a trip where you are not reliant on anyone else.
Yeah. Okay.
And that really appealed to me. There was no support crew. It was just me alone with my animals. You know, they could carry everything I needed. You know, if you hike it, that's great. But, you know, probably in some of those more remote regions, you know, you're going to need that support crew to bring in water because there is just no water in the Outback. And they are just this magnificent desert survivalists, you know, they're incredible.
So the next step was literally fly on a plane, go to Alice Springs, walk a bit west, grab a few wild camels to start. Is that how it happened, or is there a little bit more detail?
Well, there was a little bit more to it.
But you're working in the summer with the camels up at the farm north of Brisbane, up on the sunny
in
coast.
Queensland. Yep.
Yeah. And from there?
Yeah, so I was there and then I really wanted to learn more about trekking side of things. So I'd grown up riding horses and so I guess that sort of, you know, that side of it fascinated me. And then of course I remembered that I had met these people down in the Flinders on that walk, and I thought what perfect people to go and learn from. So I went back there, and they were really again that getting that taste of the outback. I went with them even further north, and I went up to a station called Clayton Station on the Birdsville track. And I think of Clayton Station as big sky country.
Yeah.
It's just where the outback is just, it becomes, you leave the Flinders, so you leave those beautiful hills and mountains, and then the country flattens out into a lot of gibber plains and a lot of sandy country, and it's just like the sky is just absolutely immense, this big blue dome above you. And, we would take guests out for maybe 9 nights at a time, sleeping under the stars with the camels. And it was always my job. I was always near the camels, and, every night, you're sleeping amongst them because you're tying them to bushes. So you're making sure everyone's okay. No one's getting tangled in ropes. And I just, it was pure adventure, and I absolutely loved it. And it was sort of at that point I thought, okay, I've got to do this for myself. And like you said, in terms of the reasons, I guess too, it was a series of events that led me down the camel road. But in a way, I guess another big thing that played a part in me starting my adventure was just the timing of it all. I started to undergo this horrible breakup with Sam at that point in time, and our paths had sort of started to go separate ways, and I was following this camel path so much more, and he, was leaving the army, and he had his own hopes and dreams. And so then my trek itself, the planning of that sort of became this cathartic mission, I guess, to get over that and to sort of prove that I hadn't broken up with him for nothing, in a way, that there was a reason. And also I was in my early 30s, I realized I didn't own a home. I didn't have kids at that point in time. Then I didn't have a relationship any longer. And it was like,
any reason
I looked around at all my, yeah, exactly. I looked around at all my friends starting to settle and have the commitment of children and so on, or careers or whatever. And I just thought, far out, if there's ever a time to do one big long adventure, now is the time to seize that.
So it's amazing because obviously you're building your knowledge, and this is such an important thing, I suppose, the understanding of the beast, understanding of your means of transport, how it works, whether it is someone like Cam Bostock yesterday who's done 139 days back to back on the PCT, or someone who's embarking on a grey nomad journey in their vehicle around Australia. You get to know your means of transport. You've got to know it so intimately, because then you can start to mentally prepare and physically prepare what you need to take on a journey like this. And having that time in the industry with the camels, knowing how they react and what their pleasure points are and what their pain points are, it's so much more vital with animals, because it's such an intimate relationship you must have struck up with them.
Big time. And that's what Uluru, going back to you were saying, I then headed to the Rock. I headed to the Rock, and that was, in a sense, like university for camels, right, or university for camel trainers.
Yeah.
It was boot camp. It was taking tourists out, with these strings of sometimes like 20 camels in a string, and making sure that everyone was safe, and having to know each individual camel and know their personalities, know what load they could carry. So, if there was some big people there, then, this was the camel to take them, or so on. And, some of those camels, they've also been doing it a long time. So they were pretty, they knew all the tricks of the trade, shall we say. Like, if you came in and you had, our uniform was a red shirt, but if you were a new red shirt, like, they could pick you out straight away and they would call your bluff.
Wow.
And so you would go out there and you'd have to get them all up to, to get them saddled, to take them to work. And they would just look at you, and it was like, essentially like they'd give you this look that just said it all. And then like they were giving you the finger, basically.
Brilliant.
Like,
the camel finger.
I'm not
That's
getting
the
up today.
finger.
I'm not getting up today. And there's nothing you can do to make me.
I love it.
And so that was this amazing training ground of, especially, like, I'm not a particularly big person either, and I'm a woman. And so there's an energy that goes with every person, I think. And, like, a big man can sort of have that authority over a camel.
Yeah.
But I had to sort of learn that differently. And I had to really learn that I don't know, it's almost like a different sort of communication. Like, you have to mentally know that you're the boss and that you can make that animal do what you want, and you have to know it in your gut, because they will sense an ounce of hesitation.
And do they respond to, time in person with them? Do they respond to love and compassion, or do they need a master or a mistress to really sort of boss them around, almost like a dog needs a master?
No, I think every camel is very different. They're very, there's some that are very sensitive. There's others that are very, you need that authority. And it was the same with my camels. And it's about getting to know the personalities of them all. And I mean, you can be a gentle boss. I learned that, I probably, like I said, those camels at Uluru, they had, they knew the tricks of the trade because they had so many people that worked with them. So they knew the ones that they could sort of, not do as they were told for that person. But when you have your own camels, it becomes a very, intimate relationship, and they know you, very well. And even my camels, I would find, I trained them myself. So they knew my voice, they knew my commands, and they knew me as a person. And, then someone else might step in and tell them the exact same thing, and they sort of would be like, well, no, who are you? We know this girl over
Not
here.
my friend,
She's the one that, But it's, I mean, it's not just, don't get me wrong, it's not just a boss relationship. It's, it's very much you're working together as a team and getting to know the strengths and weaknesses of everyone in your team, and massively with affection. They're incredibly affectionate. I mean, like I said, again, different camels. My camel Clayton is kind of like, don't touch me, I'm doing my own thing. I need everything to be structured and organized. He's almost like a bit on the spectrum, I would say.
Yeah.
But my camel Charlie, he will lay his head in your lap and smooch you all day.
Wow, it's fascinating. My deepest connection to camels, I was filming a TV show for Sunrise in about 2014, I think it was, and I had to go and play this role of Outback adventurer, and I had to go and race Alice. I still remember her, Alice the camel at Uluru Camels. I had to use her. She won that Alice Springs race that year. They threw me on her back, and I had to race that thing around. And when those camels go flat out, she was giving me the look of, who on earth is this guy getting on my back? I had to then have the whip and be on the back and charge down the line with this thing. I don't know why. It was probably the most fascinating, exciting, scary moment of my life. But that was my interaction with camels. Very, very different from your relationship building.
I raced as well. Like it's good fun. I know, and scary.
Absolutely, because you're higher than a horse in a long way.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And you've got no reins as well, so it's pure just holding on.
I think the photographer got one of those still shots of the spit coming out of the camel's mouth, my eyes wide, and me sort of up like this.
The lips everywhere.
Exactly. All right. So from camel racing into some slower paced manoeuvres now. So from the time you worked at Uluru, how long were you there for? And sort of when did you start to then go, okay, these are the pieces I need to put in place? Because obviously you've got the most important thing is your camels. You've got your team that you've got to build. You've got the equipment, you've got the journey and sponsors. It's the whole thing about building an expedition. So you're there at Uluru. Did it all transpire from there and grow from there?
Yeah, definitely. That was really sort of, it was basically an intense year in the sort of training and prepping out at Uluru. And yeah, there's, like you said, there's so much to adventures. You don't just set off and go. It's a lot of time in the dreaming, and then a lot of time in the planning as well. And so there was all sorts of stuff to be done. I contacted every station that I was going to be journeying through across the Outback. So I contacted them, also getting permits to travel across some Aboriginal land out there in the desert, making contact with communities out there. And then there was all the equipment, and it was a tricky thing equipment wise, because, there's none of that stuff you can go and get from a shop in a way. Well, you can get stuff from a shop, but it's not sort of defined as camel trekking stuff, a lot of other adventures, you can Google, like, what do I need to hike in Tasmania? But you can't do that with camel trekking. So I remember going to get a solar panel, and I was calling up the company, and they had ones that were sort of basically for people hiking that you wear in your backpack. And then they had ones that were for people caravanning. And I said, oh, well, I'm trekking with with camels. So with a caravan of camels. So I guess I sort of fall a little bit in between. Like, do you have some solar panels that you might recommend for
Just
something
slap
that
on their
I'm
back.
doing? Yeah, yeah, pretty much. So, it was there was a lot of gear that was just, I was trying to, work out really what I needed. And, like, I guess like most adventures, you overcompensate, you take too much stuff, and then there's a period of culling that down. And, now I think when I go, I almost think about my trip then, and I think, God, I took a lot of stuff. But you have the advantage that you can pack a lot on camels, so they don't make you carry a lot of lightweight gear, unlike a lot of other expeditions.
In the research stage of this trip, you mentioned sort of Robin, who did her trek. Which year was that?
77, I think it
Yeah,
was that she trekked. Yeah.
so still around? Is she still around, or was she a point of reference that you could go to, or is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Well, funnily enough, never at the time of me doing my own adventure. I had, like I said, I'd read the book and I'd seen the movie, and of course she was a massive source of inspiration, as she, was to so many people of, that generation. And then when the movie came out again, I guess my generation. But then since the trek, we've connected, and she's actually come out and met my camels, and we're now really close. So it was really special to be able to go out, and a dream come true to be able to go out camping with Robin.
Yeah, one of the
out in the
absolute
Flinders.
heroes again.
So that was, what's that?
One of the absolute heroes of the world, to sort of to read the book and be inspired to then meet in person and sort of say,
Yes.
I've not followed in your footsteps.
Yes, absolutely.
And
We did it, I guess, in such different times, and so our adventures are very different. But of course, inevitably, there's things that cross over, and experiences that we both share that it's hard to share them with anyone else other than Robin. So that's been magical.
the consistencies must be, the remoteness, the size of the skies, the lack of water, and the relationship with the animals. Time will never change those things.
Yeah, exactly. Time will never change those things.
You're going on your journey from one side of Australia to the other. How did you sort of define your points? Was it the widest point of Australia? What was the journey to become?
Yeah, I really wanted to go. It fascinated me, basically going from the widest point to the widest point. I knew that Byron Bay on the east coast, I had spent time there. I knew that that was the widest point on the east. And then I had to basically look up where the widest point on the west was, which is Shark Bay, which is just sort of almost midway down the coast, really, essentially. And it really gripped me and fascinated me going to WA, because I'd never been there before. So that I was really excited about that first part of the journey. And then I looked at my trip across, and it sounds really ridiculous, but I actually got out a map of Australia, and I pretty much like drew a line with a ruler. I looked at where that line took me from one side to the other, and it took me through a desert called the Great Victoria Desert. And it just so happens that there's a really long track called the Anne Bedell track that tracks through the Great Victoria. It's a 4-wheel drive track.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, well, that is a huge portion of my journey sort of covered by that track. So that then shaped, I guess, the other points throughout it. So I was really looking at a lot of maps that showed old station tracks and dirt trails. It was trying to find a track that I could follow that wasn't totally bush, but that did, had as few cars as possible. So really those old mapped tracks were the best.
Team selection is always a crucial part, because when you get to the pressure points and you get strained and you get tired, that relationship with your team, whoever or whatever they are, is so important. How did you sort of go about the selection of camels? Where do you start? Do you just sort of fly around in a mustering chopper and find a group that looks right, or is it recommendations of ones that have been used before? How do you build your team?
Yeah, well, it was really, in a way, kind of the team that was given to me. I was lucky enough. My boss at Uluru, Chris Hill, he took me out, and he captured his camels that he used for the trek from a station near Uluru.
Yeah.
And they were, wild camels that wander onto station country from the desert areas, because they come on looking for a drink. So we went out, and it is pretty, Wild West. You're out there flying around in, not in a chopper, but, driving around at top speed in four-wheel drive, four-wheel drives, dodging ant mounds and, spinifex and mulga trees. And
Wow.
and then we mustered in that day, about 90 or so wild camels. So a huge group.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of those camels, they go for meat because there's not really any other industry for them. But so mine's got a lucky second chance in a way.
The holiday of a
and
lifetime.
Chris helped me. Yeah, totally. And Chris helped me choose those camels, and it was basically really just looking for camels that were young, fully grown, but young camels. That I would have for a while, and looking at, I guess, good composition and so on. And then it's just the personality wise, it's a guessing game. You I guess you work with what you have, and like I said, it's finding, you then. I had my group of 5, and I started to work with them, started to train them with, having saddles on, having halters on, leading for the first time. And you're starting to look at, okay, well, who do I have a good relationship with? Who's going to be up the front is going to be my lead camel, who leads the other camels. Because that camel has to be very trusting in you and be quite, confident and independent, I guess, in a way. So you've got that really important.
Just to ask, is it a matriarchal or patriarchal society within camels when you've got a group of wild ones? How does that sort of work?
It's a matriarchal society, actually. Yeah. So there's normally one bull in a herd of females, and the bull will sort of plod around and just follow the girls wherever the girls decide they want to go. So there'll be, generally one sort of lead female camel or a couple of lead female camels.
Yeah.
I should have done this. I should have picked my only female camel, Delilah, as lead probably from the get-go, but I became really best friends with my camel, Jude, and he was an absolute weirdo and a lunatic, but I don't know, we just had a special relationship, and I had him as my lead camel until right at the final part of my journey.
So camel selection
there's also the back camels.
Yeah, go on, sorry.
Oh, also the back camel's very important too. So they're what's called your anchor camel, and they have to steady because all your camels are linked together by a rope so it goes a rope from their halter, and then the rope goes around the shoulders of the camel in front. So it's this big long string that you're controlling, and so that back camel really sort of provides a stable point at the back, and they have to be very unshakable too. Because you might have a car that comes up behind them, or you might have something spooked from behind. So you need that camel to be very solid, and then you can have, the riffraff goes in between.
We're going to I'm looking at my clock and worrying that we've got not much time to do a huge crossing of Australia, which is what you were lucky enough to have. So Uluru, you've got your camels, you've chosen your camels, you've got your 5. There's obviously, they don't just get on a plane and transport across. How do you get your stuff across, and how long did it take from that moment of selection to get them to that start point and all the work in between?
Yeah, that was huge. I had to get my truck license. I had to buy a truck because there's no one doing the trucking road from Uluru to Shark Bay.
Yeah.
It's such a bizarre route. So I bought a truck, luckily from my boss out at Uluru, loaded them on with all the gear, took my friend Greg, who was an Aboriginal guy I was working with at the time, and he helped, share the driving with me, and we drove across the country, basically into the pandemic, really.
Yeah.
So just as we drove into WA, that all hit, and everywhere started shutting their borders, and we essentially sort of got locked into Western Australia. And I had this sort of period of time going, what the hell am I going to do? Everywhere was, everyone's starting to say, you've got to stay home. You can't, everyone that's traveling has got to go home.
Wow.
Businesses were shutting, all of that. And I just thought, well, what am I going to do if I stay here on this? I sort of landed on a station, Carbler Station, which is where I started from. But I thought, what am I going to do if I stay here? I might as well just set off. I'm only going to be walking on my own anyway.
And to be honest, WA is a very big
that's
portion of Australia, isn't it? So, you've
well,
got
that's what I
quite a
thought.
bit
I
of
sort
lead
of figured.
time.
Yeah, I sort of thought hopefully by the time I get to the border with WA and South Australia, then, things will have changed and we'll figure it out from there. But yeah, at that point in time, I got so lucky, in a way. I got trapped into the state. And if I'd left it a week longer, I would have been trapped out of the state and unable to even start.
And from memory, it was a bit of a one-way border in a way, wasn't it? People weren't allowed into a WA, but they could leave. So you're sort of on the right side of it.
Yes.
You see?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you start in Shark Bay. I know from the book that you are in the water and you're trying to get the camels in the water because that's your sort of you're leaving of one side and journeying to the next ocean, which is a long way away. What was that feel like of that sort of last few hours?
That day was such a beautiful day. It was just magical down there at Shark Bay. Like the Indian Ocean is just something else. It's, it has a sort of turquoiseness, I guess, about it that you don't get in the Pacific Ocean, and the really white sand, but then contrasted by, the blue sky, the red dirt there. So that's something really special. And I went for a swim, and I knew I wasn't going to get in the water for a long time, so that was lovely. And it was a massive relief too, to be honest, because like we spoke about, all of that planning phase is it's so intense. You've got to-do lists, and then there was the stress of the journey itself in the truck coming over with the camels. Were the camels going to be okay in the truck? Was all the gear going to be okay? Because we were traveling, across a dirt corrugated road. It's one of the notorious roughest roads, in the Outback. So that was a 6-day journey in itself. It was an adventure to even reach the start line. So then there was this huge feeling of relief when I was standing on the beach thinking, like I could have almost gone home that day there and I would have felt like I'd done it. Like I just felt this massive sense of, accomplishment to have even got there.
How did the camels travel that part? Because obviously that they're the bulk of your existence on this whole journey. You can't do it without them.
Cargo.
So for them to be in a truck and then move across for that long, it must have been a big sort of relief to open those doors and have them all, healthy and happy.
Oh, yeah, and it takes it out of them, that like any, they were tired at the end of that truck journey. Can you imagine being rattled around on the back of a truck, as anyone is, if they do a big journey across the Outback in a car. But I guess it's even worse for them because they're on the back, and I couldn't. There was no because we were traveling through the desert. There was no loading ramps or anything, so they had to stay on the truck for 3 days at a time. And then there was one station I got them off for a break in between. So they were heroes. I think back to that and I just think, God, they did well to deal with that. And they were jammed on like sardines because it was sort of, the biggest truck, the biggest stock crate I could get, and it was, so they put up with a lot. So it was so nice to get them off and have them out there grazing and sort of adapting to being, there. And I gave them a good break because I knew I couldn't start with them having come straight off the back of that. And that's the thing with animals. You've always sort of got to go a bit more at their pace. And so I think we had a good 2 to 3 weeks even I gave them break before we even set off. And that was just to get feed in their bellies and get them sort of up to strength.
What does downtime for a camel look like? What is their nirvana? Is it, by a watering hole with lots and lots of fresh food? How does a camel chill?
Oh, wandering. They're great wanderers. They never stay still. You might think you put them in the best feed of all time and they'll browse that for a certain amount of time and then they wander off to the next best thing. They like to eat a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Yeah. Amazing variety to keep their guts going. Yeah.
So you got them,
and then they'll sit down and they'll chew their cud.
You got the match ready. You got the gear on. You got everything loaded on their backs, and then day one sort of kicks into gear. Nervous excitement, as most people probably would be at that stage. So how did it feel for you, and what was that day one like?
Yeah, well, so it was sort of a little bit odd because I couldn't start right. I had to unload the camels from the truck sort of about a day's walk before the beach. Mm-hmm. So I sort of walked to the beach and I sort of had my beginning at the beach, and then I walked back to the station and sort of picked up the rest of my gear there then. Yeah, okay. And then it was like that was then the sort of real beginning then. It was once all the gear was loaded on. And that's when I sort of got over the elation of being at the coast and how beautiful that was, and got into, oh, well, this is actually really scary. And it was a incredibly rough start to the journey. I felt for me and for the camels, it was, I just don't think I had realized a lot. I hadn't realized how incredibly remote Western Australia is. And straight from the get-go, it's not like the East Coast where you sort of, there's population and then it gradually sort of gets less and less and more remote. In Western Australia, you are straight into it. And I was in an area of country that was very isolated. There were a lot of old stations that had been abandoned, or stations that had no one living on them. So everything sort of felt old, abandoned.
Yeah, no, it's scary in a way.
It was in the grips of a really bad drought. So the feed was terrible for the camels, and they were still getting used to it, and I was still getting used to it. So they were constantly tired from carrying their loads. We weren't doing very many Ks every day, and the country itself was flat and shrubby and dead flat, and it just made it so disorientating with just no landmarks and this feeling of being almost, and I wasn't expecting this because, you think of the outback or deserts as, wide open spaces, and, the Sahara with sand dunes, and, you can see as far as, the eye can see. And it wasn't like that at the beginning. It was closed in, and the camels felt it too. They didn't like that feeling of being closed in. And so it was kind of like they were always, every time we get to camp, there was no relaxation because they were always spooked, and they were always wanting to sort of get beyond the tree line to see the horizon. Okay. And I was terrified at that point because I suddenly realized, oh my God, I've got to be so careful that I don't lose them while they graze, because you plonk all your gear, everything that you need to survive down in the middle of the bush. And then the camels have got to go graze. But then you can't leave the camels because you might lose the camels. So then, but you also don't want to lose your gear. So you're sort of constantly making sure I've got to set a waypoint to where my gear is so that I can navigate back there, because they would go Ks grazing. I'd do another, 4 Ks or more sometimes in one direction, just with them grazing in an afternoon. You would try and give them a sort of a longer period of time off to get food in their bellies because they were struggling to find stuff to eat. But then that also meant this long period of time when you still weren't, you were still walking.
Which is when also you really have earned your downtime. I mean, the camels have got it's almost the two opposites, isn't it? You could sit down and have your food in one space, but the camels need to keep moving to fuel their bellies to give them the energy the next day. So it's almost like you've got two opposing forces working.
Yeah. And that's it. Like, all you want to do is sit down and, put your feet up and have a cup of tea or prep your dinner and all of that. But I could never prep my dinner until they were all back from grazing, and you would try to maximize that time because I was watching them drastically lose weight. So I was really concerned about that. And I remember even having moments where, I would have 2 of the camels and I would hook them up together to sort of bring back to camp at the end of an evening. And then, I'd go around 2 trees and I'd be looking for the other camels. And it was like, you'd almost lose the camels. I mean, they always generally stick together. They're always together as a herd. But still, it's amazing. I learned very quickly not to plug the bells. I had bells all around all of their necks, and I would plug them when, we walked during the day because you don't want to listen to clang, 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 clang continuously. But when I was away and not with the gear, I never plugged the bells because I was so worried that, I might lose them. Yeah. And
so your biggest fears in a way must have been then losing the camels and losing your camp. So to mitigate against that, you talk about sort of marking a waypoint. So you've got some technology with you. You got a GPS with you that you're charging through solar, and that's your means of establishing camp, setting your waypoint, and knowing if I wander off and everything looks exactly the same at 360 degrees, I know my gear, my sort of lifeline to humanity is back there.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So my phone basically acted as my GPS. And so always making sure I had my phone in my pocket. And I learnt this down the track, after a pretty severe incident of losing the camels. But I learnt about, making sure that having all of my gear on me at all times, like all the major safety things that I needed. So the sat phone, the early days I was very slack. I would sort of wander off without half of that stuff.
Yeah.
But I made sure, I always had my phone that had the GPS, the sat phone. I had some water on me. I had my pocket knife with me. What else? I even had a lighter in my pocket just in case I needed to start a fire. So having those sort of essential safety items on me at all times, that was a very valuable lesson.
And I've obviously only sort of learned that from micro trigger events where you suddenly go, oh my God, what if this happened and if this happened? Your mind is constantly sort of rotating these scenarios, I imagine. So some of your most challenging moments on this trip, some of the moments where you've really gone, oh, the big shit's happening.
Well, I had a pretty macro experience rather than micro experience. We've sort of honed that home. And that was probably about 2 months in. So probably about 2 months in. And I was sort of getting to that point. I think, you go through the terrors of beginning and then you sort of get to that point where you start to go, oh, I can do this. And you start to get a little bit complacent and things start to fall through the cracks and so on. And on this particular day, I had stashed everything away. I had my phone on me that I was using for my GPS, but I had stashed everything away in the saddlebags because I sort of thought, oh, well, the joy is of walking with camels is that you don't have to carry a backpack. You don't have to carry your own water. You don't have to carry any of this stuff because the camels do that for you. And I was walking along and I was singing that day because I was in a really good mood. And I realized we'd gone in the wrong direction. And I thought, and I looked at the maps again and I thought, oh, that's all right. I can connect with the roads that I was going to take if I just cut across this bit of bush. So I turned off and I went off into the bush and I thought, oh, it's not too bad. It's pretty clear. Kept going further and further into the bush. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the camel spooked at something. The lead rope got ripped out of my hand. I fell flat on my face. I watched all the camels topple over themselves, gears starting to fall off their backs. And then they got up and they just totally freaked. They spooked at whatever it was that they had seen and contributed with the fact that gear was starting to sort of come loose. And so everything was rattling on them and they just bolted. And I ran after them. There was nothing else I could do. So I set off after them at this, panicked run, heaving and so on. I was walk fit, but I wasn't run fit. And I started to lose them over the horizon. I started to even lose where they were going and I had to keep stopping and listening to the sound of the jerry cans, which were sort of smashing around on the back camel as they were running. And that's when I had this panic. I thought, oh my God, I don't have anything on me. I need to survive. I don't even have water on me. Everything was on, I'd packed the sat phone on their backs. How stupid had I been?
The situation obviously came right after that.
Knife.
The situation came right because, the worst case scenario is everything's gone.
That's it. And it's, it's dangerous for them because they're all linked together with ropes with a bunch of gear tied to their back. So what if I don't get them back? And, and then also it's dangerous for me. And I was honest. I wasn't in the true desert by that point. I was on a station, but I was still on a station that was, I don't know, 500,000 acres or more, so I was miles away from anyone and no one knew because I'd gone cross country. No one knew, where I was. And I didn't know where I was because then my phone dropped. Yeah. And I didn't even have a GPS. I lost my phone back where I'd fallen over and I ran so far and became so disorientated that I didn't know where the hell I was. And thank God I caught the camels that day. They sort of twisted themselves around a bush and became entangled and I got hold of them. And it took me 2 hours, I think, to slowly and meticulously retrace their prints back to where it had all happened and retrieve the rest of my gear, retrieve my phone. So that was a huge wake up call in the early days.
It must have been
taking it seriously.
The adrenal gland must have been empty because obviously you're running on adrenaline to get to that point to capture them. And in that moment of, was it an emotional unload of, tears and flooding yourself in the middle of the desert and just going, my God, I've been so lucky? Or was it right, back on the job, I've got to get going? Oh, we might have
It was a bit of both. It was a bit of both. So I was furious. I remember at the beginning, I was so angry at the camels because I think a lot of the time, throughout my whole journey, there was a lot of, I'm ashamed to say it now because I love my camels dearly, but there was so much anger that would bubble up because you're tired, you're frustrated, and I guess it's like any teammate, you sort of take it out on them. And I was furious that they could have put me in such a dangerous situation. Obviously, it wasn't their fault. But I was terrified more than anything. I think I was terrified that they would have hurt themselves, that they could have broken a leg, or that something could have happened to them, because not only were they my lifeline, but they were my best friends at this point. And yeah, so I was furious. I tied my lead camel Jude to a bush. I scolded him, told him to sit down, because I just wanted to make sure that they were 100% secure. So I got him to sit down, and I put a strap around their legs, which is what I did, what I do when I saddle them anyway. Yeah. But it just meant that he couldn't get up and run anywhere, and he knew that was the signal to sit down, and you can't move at this point. And so I sat him down, and I checked all the others over. Yeah, and then I just broke down into tears, and blubbered for a while, and then I remembered, actually. So a friend had given me Bob Cooper, who's a survivalist in Australia. They had given me his book before I left. And I remember having read his book, and he had said something like, if you're lost in the desert, you've got to remember the ABCs. And I couldn't remember half of them, but I could remember that B stood for make a brew or something like that.
It's really important.
And I thought, and it was to do with basically getting yourself like out of that emotional state and into a state where you can actually function to get the job done. And so I got my billy can out, and I made a cup of tea, in tears and everything. And I made another cup of tea, and I got out a chocolate bar, and I ate my emotions away with a chocolate bar. And it gave me just long enough that I actually needed to go, okay, I can do this, because I couldn't, I think you start to learn, and probably one of my biggest takeaways from such an adventure was that, yes, it's fine to cry. There's nothing wrong with that. But where's it going to get you in the end? You can't just blubber forever, because there's no one coming to help you. You have to help yourself.
Perfect quote.
And I had to move forward for the camels. We couldn't just camp where we were. We had to find somewhere with better feed. We had to keep on going. And so, yeah, I had that cup of tea, and I just regrouped and went, okay, what do I need to do? I need to find my phone. I need to trace the steps back to get the phone. Then I need to reload. I need to, what's broken on the pack gear, I need to try and make some sort of, MacGyver fix and try and get that, to stay on. And then we need to move forward and get to our next camp. So it was this constant, I guess, constant lessons of, putting one foot in front of the other, and just moving forward, even if that's slowly, just moving.
And slightly
moving
revising your mental safety plan of what you need to have on you by the sounds of it. Listen, I don't know how your time scale is going there on that side of the planet. I would love to eke another 15 minutes out of this if I can. Is that okay with you for a start?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's fine.
Brilliant. Because we're just into it. We're just into it now. So, okay, let's look at the whole journey. How long was your whole journey? What was the total time and your total distance that you covered on the whole thing?
So really it was at that point in time then. So originally I set off with the intention of doing it in a year. Well, when I say in a year, you sort of, I thought 9 months, because you restricted it in that environment to walking basically in the winter months, because the Outback's so bloody hot.
Yeah.
So I thought 9 months I can do it. I can be back I can be back by summer, when summer hits, and I can reach Byron by then. And then I had that incident with the camels taking off on me, and it sort of brought everything back to reality. And I thought, I'm tackling this way too fast and furiously, that things are going wrong. Their health is going downhill, and I need to rethink my plans. And I remember I chatted to Chris out at Uluru at the time, and he said, like, no one, I know you've said to the world, or, said to your friends and family that, you're going to do it in 9 months, but no one will, it's your trip. It's your journey. No one will begrudge you if you do what's right for your camels. And so I really took on board that advice, and I thought, yeah, I need to slow it down. And I came to the realization that I was going to have to split the trip into 2 years. So I essentially did part 1 and then part 2 of the journey. So part 1 took me up to Coober Pedy, across the Great Victoria Desert, and up to Cooper Pedy, and then I had to break and wait out the summer, and then part 2 took me from Cooper Pedy to the east coast of Australia. So it was a total of 13 months walking.
How
Across
does the
2 years,
relationship, obviously, your health and that camel's health is probably the single most important entity of the whole thing in terms of your physical health. So arms and legs and the bits you need to operate every single day. How was that? And your internals as well, because you are surviving on something that is a very sort of restricted diet in a way. How did that go?
Not too badly. Look, I always tried to make sure that I ate really, as well as I could. I dehydrated a lot of food. I tried to make proper meals, Like I said, I wasn't restricted by weight, so I could take things like potatoes and sweet potatoes, anything that would last out of a fridge. So I always tried to pack as many veggies in there, and, I took rices and lentils and, so a lot of stuff like that. I massively craved fresh salads and things when I came into places, and every time I'd stop at a station too, and I would just eat and eat. And I swear the families at stations must have thought, "Geez, this girl can eat," because I would just be sort of feeling that hunger for days. And when I was crossing the Great Victoria Desert, I was, the weight was just falling off me. I was nothing but, lean muscle. And I was drizzling, olive oil on everything, trying to sort of get in fats. But I felt great. I felt amazing. I've actually never felt better. And I remember when I stopped for the summer, it was like I had so much energy in my body. I couldn't sit still. I started running because I needed to burn that energy that I had from having done the trek, or done
and the
part
camels
of the trek
as well.
And the camels were hard. Yeah, it was hard to keep the weight on them, especially in the first half, and especially across that desert crossing, because so much of WA was so dry.
Yeah.
So that really had an effect on them, and they were pretty skinny. And I think now the idea that the fact that I had to split the trip into 2 years was probably the biggest blessing in disguise, because I gave them a whole summer to put that weight back on. And I don't think they could have done the whole crossing in one go with the weight they had, because they were young as well. And they were still, camels don't mature until they're sort of 8 or 9 years old. So they still had a bit of growing to do to sort of reach their full size. So they're trying to grow their bodies and sustain doing a big, marathon of a mission. I call it drive-by eating for them on a camel trek. So they have to learn to walk. Yeah. And it's like the McDonald's drive-through, and then they have to take a bite as they walk, because you're constantly, trying to get as much feed into them as possible.
They're not within earshot of the camels, are they? Because I know with every team there's always a favourite. Did you have a favourite? And I know you probably can't say that.
I know. I shouldn't say it, but I did. As much of a lunatic as he was, Jude was. He was just a quirky camel.
When you've sort of come back onto the trail, you sort of have your downtime. You've got your summer. You got the fattening period for yourself and the camels, and you get back on it. Did it feel like the second part of the journey? Did it really feel like, okay, let's get into this with as much energy and passion as the first half of it, but also with so much more acquired knowledge? It must have been a different start to the second half.
100%. I was actually, I took a lot of voice recordings across and when I did my journey, and I haven't listened to them in ages. And actually, just before this talk, I was listening to some of them, and it was from the second part of my journey, and I could really hear how much in my voice, like, I was just loving the trip at that point. It was I'd gone through the hardships, and I'm so glad that I had that. Like, the first half of my journey was tough. It was remote. It was isolated. I met fantastic people on the way that gave me a lot of help. But, I trekked through the centre of the Great Victoria Desert when COVID was on. So there was no one out there.
No one around. Wow.
All that four-wheel drive track was abandoned. And it was an amazing experience, but it was very isolating. And I was Ks away from anyone, hundreds of Ks. And then the second half of the journey really revolved a lot more around people.
Yeah.
and having that shift. But I could hear in my voice when I was listening to those recordings just how much I had started. I'd really found my groove. I had the system down pat with the camels. I had the gear down pat. I could saddle them. The early days, like, it used to take me sort of 2 hours to get all that gear on their back. Wow. And by the end, I was like, 45 minutes. Yeah, here we go. Here's the workout. Bam, bam,
a well-oiled machine.
Saddle cloth, saddle. Yeah, well-oiled machine, exactly. And I started to, I think the biggest thing, I started to really slow down. And I had realized by that point, it had taken me the camels taking off. It had taken me the walk through the desert. It had taken me all of that time to actually really slow properly mentally to their pace, which is camels only walk at 3K an hour. So it's an incredibly slow journey across the country. But it's also, that's, I think, the beauty of them. They're the most relaxing animal to be around. There's a real peacefulness. And I started to sort of zone into that and to love being out there in amongst the elements, to sort of my observation of everything, the landscape around me, all the little finite, minute details started to be magnified because I was just present in the space and in the environment.
It's a really good way to summarize it when you say, the environment was magnified. We do a trip to the World's Highest Road in India, and we do it on motorbikes and we do it on bicycles. And the bicycle's journey is always so much more engaging, so much more fascinating, because you can hear the little animals scuttling off. You can see the petals on the flowers. You can smell different smells. It's so different. Moving at that pace, you must get into this metronomic, almost Zen state where you've just got the noise. And I suppose everything comes to life, the wind on your ears and the sound of camels moving. Can you is it easy to transport yourself back into that place with all the distraction of the modern world?
Yeah, I still can sort of zone into that a bit. I especially remember there was a time in the Great Victoria Desert I was walking. I was walking in the really early hours of the morning because it had started to come into that summertime, and I was getting really hot weather, and there wasn't a lot of water out there. And so the only way to deal with that and to sort of keep the camels going, I guess, with less water rations, was to walk in the dark in the morning. And it just turned into being the most magical time. I was so synced into knowing what the moon was doing, and I was always trying to sort of move with the moon. So hopefully the moon was rising in the morning, and I had a bit of light on the trail. But it's that sort of dark environment, I guess, like you said, it sort of hones you into that. It magnifies all the sounds around you, but it brings you into this sort of little present bubble around yourself. And I just listened to the sound of the bells. I'd plug the bells, but they would be a little bit of clunking and the hobbles around their necks, just moving, and then the camels chewing their cud in that really rhythmical way. And then that beautiful silence of the desert, because it is a very silent environment, because there's not a lot of, there's creatures out there, but because of the cold of winter time, well, actually it was warming up then, but still, because there's less creatures than in a tropical environment, I guess. So you have that in a real silence.
Yeah, because I mean, when we do our Arctic trip, exactly the same. We're going to -30s in 3 days' time, and there is nothing out there. It is pitch black. It's very cold, and there's nothing out there, and everything is heightened. That sensory overload from your ears, where there's nothing apart from the tinnitus that I have ringing through this ear. Everything else is so loud. So you must have sort of in the cold of the desert feel that too.
Yeah, that silence is beautiful. I think it's magical. I did one time, I remember when the camels were grazing, and I used to love just listening. Yeah, all you could hear was sort of just the chiming of their bells as they grazed, and it was such a relaxing time of day, as long as they weren't wandering too far. But I plugged their bells one time just to sort of listen to that silence. And then I was so used to hearing the bells, it sort of almost unnerved me. And I thought, oh no, I've got to unplug them again and have them back as company. But yeah, as I walked, the rhythm of them chewing their cud is, and to sleep next to that every night is such has such a calming effect, I think.
I've just done
in the background, looked at a map. I still try and.
Sorry, go on, finish your bit.
Oh no, I still try and sort of tune myself back into that now, because it's very easy to get out of that, like you said, in the hustle and bustle of the modern world. And I think it's so, there's nothing that will replace that feeling of presence and freedom at the same time in those, wilderness environments.
I just, while I was talking to you, very naughtily popped up my web browser because I needed a Google map in front of me just to look at sort of Cuba PD, past Lake Eyre, then the journey that sort of starts to head east towards Byron. At what point did you felt like you left the Outback when you sort of talk about it? Because it's a very sort of hot spot, random settlements and then towns, and then, how does that work when you're getting that far east across to Byron?
Yeah, I went through an area which was a sort of surprising area. It was called the Bullagree, and it was just on the border of New South Wales and Queensland. I was walking along the dog fence at the time, and it's a sort of part of of a bunch of stations that they don't run stock on, because it's sort of a desert landscape with undulating dunes, and it's the flow off of the Bullo River, which turns into a swampland.
Yeah.
And it was a really magical part of my journey too, because like I said, I had really tuned into that I was going so slowly because I didn't want it to end. I was doing, some days I thought, oh, I might just do 10K and then I might just hang out with my camels at camp, because I sort of in a way didn't want to get to the East Coast and didn't want to get to that craziness. But yeah, that was a feeling like, oh, I've left the last June here behind.
Yeah.
And I was probably still in what is classed as the Outback for a while, but it was, the properties start to get smaller. Yeah, there's no real definition to where it ends and begins. The properties just get smaller and smaller, and then you hit the Great Dividing Range, and that's a massive, landmark before you hit the East Coast. So then it's up and over the mountains, which the camels had never sort of been through before then getting to the busyness of the roads on the other side. And I really said goodbye to the journey, I think probably, just before even the range, but probably the last night I had on my own was on the range. And then after that, I needed help to navigate those roads. So
yes, that's the next question.
So I had this sort of final night on my own with them. And then the hell began.
Yeah. So obviously then you've sort of still got to start informing authorities. I am a female traveling with camels. How do I safely navigate myself to the eastern point of Australia? How did that go, and who was your assistant to get you sort of through to that last final few days?
Well, I had it had become a bit of a love story. I had met someone in the centre of Australia on my summer break, and he worked in a little bakery in the Flinders Ranges, and Jimmy was his name, and he had been coming out to see me every time that I braked with the camels. And I fought it for ages. I didn't want the trip I wanted it so much to be a solo thing, and I fought so hard to sort of win that independence and that respect, I guess, on the first half of the journey, that it was really hard for me to let go of that.
Yeah.
But I also realized actually how much on the second half of the journey I loved sharing it with other people. And so Jimmy, started coming along, and he would be there during breaks, and he, became this huge, massive help. He drove 16,000 kilometers there and back from the Flinders, basically, in the northern South Australia, across to where I was camped with all my supplies. And then he started helping me with then logistics as well, because the properties had got that small. I couldn't, it wasn't like contacting 8 stations and that was, 6 months worth of travel. It was now contacting, I'd be stopping at someone's place every single day, Yeah. So he then helped with those logistics that I wasn't able to do while I was on the road with the camels. And then he became basically, my support crew navigating the roads. So he would go up in front, and my friend Kieran came along as well, and she drove behind in a car to slow traffic down, because people, would come whizzing around, round bends at 80k an hour, and I'm walking there, with basically what is, a semi trailer's length of like 10 meters long of of camels,
Yeah.
slowly cruising along at 3K an hour. So it's incredibly dangerous, and they can, fan out onto the road if they get spooked and be in the way. So Jimmy went up the front, Tyron drove at the back, and they basically kept me safe to the coast.
It must have been, but
Through some
considering
pretty
the
hairy
normal
roads.
population that sort of hang out of the vibe of Byron, the white linen crew, as we sort of sometimes call them, it must have been interesting seeing this almost the carnival procession coming through town. What was the feel like? Were the kids getting involved? Was it a real party atmosphere?
It was terrifying, and it was wonderful at the same time. Like it was terrifying on the roads, and I was done with it by that point. I had embarked on the journey really to have that solitude out in the desert, and that's what I wanted to explore the most. But because I had sort of set this agenda of going from A to B, it was kind of like that last half had to be done, but it was not what I did the trip for. And so navigating those roads, absolutely terrifying. People are idiots in cars. They think that they're invincible in a little tin, little tin box around them, even though you've got 4-ton worth of animals on you that could fly through their windscreen. But I had several areas where it was like the word had got around and people had told everyone. And, I remember like a couple of streets specifically, and everyone had come out to the end of their driveway on a rainy day with umbrellas and everything just to wave us, by, and all the family were there. And, and then even on some streets, we'd have people slowing down and just like everyone's faces out of the car. I was worried people were going to have a car crash all the time because they'd be filming out the car window, and as they were filming with their iPhone, they'd be sort of veering slowly off the road, So yeah, it was quite something. And that main street, if anyone's been into Byron Bay, that the main street into Byron is notorious for being choked with traffic on a weekend. The K's along that main street, and I remember just Jimmy just strode out into the road and just held up the traffic. You've just got to act like you've got authority, I think, if you're in that position.
Absolutely.
When you give someone a high vis vest and a walkie-talkie, and it's amazing what people will do for you. But even though he had no qualifications or anything.
You knew what to expect. As a human, you've been in that environment before. How did the 5 go, and how did Jude, your lead camel, deal with this sort of almost like unexpected celebrity, but also the noise and the space they're in?
Yeah. Oh, it was the thing I was probably most worried about on the second half of my journey. I'd gone through the sort of waterless country. I'd conquered that fear. And then the second half of my journey was really the fear of adapting the camels to civilization, because they had come from the wild. Then we had set off on this very remote journey. So they weren't particularly used to people, definitely not used to cars. But it was amazing to see that evolution. Jude never quite got there. He was a little bit of a nutter, and I ended up having to replace him with Delilah as my lead camel.
Right.
But in general, as a team, they were amazing to watch that. I mean, obviously we got a little busier and a little busier and a little busier.
Yeah.
And to the end point where we were in the hills in Byron, and we stopped at a pub called the Eltham Pub, and it's a very trendy hipster pub, really buzzing on a Sunday. They've got live music and everything. And I pulled up there, pulled the camels in to sort of right in the front, out the front of the pub. They had like cleared an area for me to bring in with the camels, and there's hordes of people around, live music going. And they just stood there and chewed their cud. And it was one of the proudest moments I've ever had with them. Just amazing, adaptable animals.
Where do they sit and chew, or stand and chew their cud tonight? Where are the camels as we speak?
On Clayton Station in South Australia. So they are in a big old paddock up there. I think it's like a 64,000 acre paddock. And yeah, it's basically like, sort of being back in the wild for them. Yeah. There's tons of grape seed. They roam around.
How often do you get
camel
to see
country.
them? Do they recognize you? Is the relationship sort of still there and the link?
Oh, 100%. They're like elephants, I guess, camels, long memories. And, you only have to meet them once and they'll remember you. And
That must feel
yeah,
good, because a camel with
they,
dementia would be an awful experience after something like
oh,
that together.
yeah. But no, they'll come over. They'll come over for carrots. You know, if you can find them in the paddock, they'll come over for carrots. And you know, Jimmy and I have since taken them out. The beginning of last year, we took them out to Lake Torrens, which is the second largest salt lake after Lake Eyre.
Yeah.
Just on a trip on our own,
Because
and you know, just because it's fantastic to explore those wild places with them.
So it sounds like the 16,000 kilometers were worth driving all the way from the bakery. It sounds like Jimmy's still a big part of their life.
He's still
Yeah.
on the scene.
Good.
Yeah, we run the farm here together at Kilcoy, and yeah, things have worked out. So the summer fling, yeah, got a little extended
That's
beyond what
the
I was
ultimate long
anticipating.
distance relationship. I love the fact it's worked out. So you obviously you got the adventurous spirit that runs through you, and when you get to the end of a trip like this, there's always the sort of natural drop off at the end, and your mind goes, "Oh, it either goes, never show me a camel again in my life," or it goes, "Oh, maybe at some point there might be something else in the future." How's your head gone post trip?
I think you go through all of those. There was definitely that feeling of there was a huge relief when I finished, because I'd been carrying, I guess the burden of looking after that team of camels the whole way across the country. So I remember just getting them, after all of those roads, getting them through the gate into this paddock where we were sort of finishing our journey after we had reached the beach, and locking the gate on the paddock, or putting the chain on the gate in the paddock. And then I literally just broke down and cried, because it was just that emotional release of just, oh my God, I've got them here and nothing, they're safe. They're okay. No one's hurt, you know, because it was constant that carrying that worry of, have they eaten enough? You know, are they healthy enough? Is someone lame? You know, are they okay? Are they having a good time? Even you're
Total
worried
mother
about, you know,
henning, but absolutely just
yeah. So, you know, it was, yeah, that was a huge relief. And then came all the logistics of taking them back out to South Australia. So that was sort of ticking away. So it was sort of like the journey finished, but then it wasn't really over. And then the book followed on after that. So there was definitely a period where I sort of thought, I just want to put them out in the paddock, and I just want them to be, you know, free camels to just do what they want.
Camels.
And they were sort of like lost souls when they got out there to begin with. I remember they were sort of a little bit like, oh, well, what do we do without you being here all the time? And they stood in one spot, and you'd never see them anywhere else in the paddock. And I thought, have you guys gone anywhere? And then they just, you know, relaxed into being their own herd. And
very different
you know,
experience from sort of the human
camels
mastery
doing
of
their own
what
thing.
SeaWorld would give to an orca, but almost like they've been educated to believe that they need to have someone to tell them when to do things, and sort of getting back into that, you know, acclimatizing them back into the release in a way.
Yeah, it was weird. It was never something I thought that I would just, you know, let them go in the paddock and they would just wander around. But I hadn't realized how much, you know, I think they got so used to the routine of the travel, and, you know, placing camp, always in different places, but a consistency and a routine to that. And then they were jolted out of that, and it took them a while to you know, reassess, really reevaluate. And of course, and they were able to do that. They are wild core camels. That's in their DNA. You know, they know those environments, and they know that place. And so then for me, it was a sort of letting go of having them as a part of, you know, being linked to them every single day. That was hard to let go of that. That was really hard to not, you know, be sleeping next to them every single night, and to have them in my, you know, in a daily life. But I was nearby them. I lived in South Australia for a while after the trip, and I wrote my book in South Australia, you know, surrounded by that environment and that outback environment, which was a really nice way to do it. And I sort of then got to relive, I guess, my journey through writing the book. And, you know, that can be quite a cathartic experience in itself. You know, and you sort of put everything into perspective and put all the pieces of the puzzle together and make it into this, you know, tidy, neat little thing, I guess, that is produced at the end of it. Yeah, and then there's so it's a sort of slow progression down into the sort of like, okay, we're sort of letting go of that trip, and now it's just starting to look at new chapters of life and looking at the next adventure, which might contain camels with 2 humps rather than 1. We'll see.
Oh, a bit of a teaser there. I like it. We literally, this is the longest ever podcast I have done. I am fascinated by it. I could do another hour of this one because it just enthralls me, sort of the magnitude, but also the randomness of the whole journey and everything else. This is the book. It is a fascinating read. Sophie, how do we get to watch any of the sort of video footage you've done, and what are your social media channels? So anyone watching that's come to this through a different network, how do we follow what you do?
Yeah, sure. So, well, you can get my book from any bookshop. You can, if they don't have it, you can ask them to order it in. It's called The Crossing. You can jump on my website, which is my full name, so sophiematterson.com. If you can't remember that, you can always Google Camel Girl
Crazy
or
Camel
something
Girl,
like that. I'm sure I'll come up at some point, or Sophie Camels, that might come up.
Yeah.
There is some great YouTube videos. Actually, my friend Mike, who was on Alone Australia, Outback Mike, he made some great YouTube videos of a little bit later on in my trip. And my Instagram is just my name, Sophie Matterson again. So there's lots of photos on there if you scroll down.
From the south of England to Kilcoy, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you on the opposite side of the world. You've travelled most of it across Australia. We are fascinated to see what comes up next on the spectrum of craziness for you. It's awesome to hear it. It's awesome to see it. And it's been awesome to read it as well. So thank you for the privilege of doing that. From everybody in the Wild Earth community and us Wild Earthlings, thank you very much for your time, Sophie.
Thank you, Ben. It's been such a fun chat.
Soon.